This is not a video about judgment, and it is not a story designed to shock you. This is a confrontation with a pattern that many people live inside without ever seeing it clearly. Today, we are speaking to those who find themselves asking a painful, recurring question. Why do I keep choosing the same kind of person and ending up in the same kind of pain? If you are a woman in your late 20s to 40s, if you've experienced cycles of emotional exhaustion, unstable relationships, and a lingering sense of emptiness, this lecture is for you. But let me be precise. This is not about bad decisions. This is not about weak willpower. And this is certainly not about morality. The root of repetitive sexual or relational behavior lies much deeper. It lies in what psychology calls internal working models of attachment, and what ancient philosophy describes as the illusion of the mind, mistaking itself for reality. Let's begin with a fundamental premise. What you feel is not always truth. Loneliness, fear of abandonment, the craving to be chosen. These emotions feel real, overwhelming, undeniable. But from both modern psychology and contemplative traditions, we understand something unsettling. These emotions are often not reflections of reality. They are echoes of the past, and yet we act on them as if they are truth. That is where the cycle begins. When emotional pain seeks resolution, it looks for the fastest available relief. For some, that relief becomes sexual connection, not because of desire alone, but because of what that connection represents. Validation, existence, temporary relief from inner emptiness. At that moment, it feels like a choice. But in reality, it is closer to what neuroscience would call an automatic behavioral loop driven by conditioned emotional memory. In other words, you are not choosing the behavior. The pattern is choosing for you. And if this structure remains unconscious, life will repeat itself with mathematical precision. Different faces, same dynamics, different emotions, same ending. Brief connection followed by deeper emptiness. Temporary relief followed by collapse. Again and again. This is what in Buddhist psychology is described as a cycle of craving and suffering, not as a metaphor, but as a psychological mechanism. Now, to understand this pattern fully, we must go back far earlier than most people are willing to look. We must go back to childhood. In modern psychology, particularly in John Bowlby's attachment theory, later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, there is a foundational claim. The way you were loved as a child becomes the blueprint for how you experience love as an adult. This is not poetic language. This is empirical observation. If a child grows up in an environment where their emotions are acknowledged, their distress is responded to, their presence feels safe and valued, they develop what we call secure attachment. And from that emerges a simple but powerful belief. I am worthy of love. These individuals tend to form stable relationships, regulate their impulses, and do not rely on extreme behaviors to feel validated. But when a child grows up in inconsistency, neglect, or emotional absence, a very different internal system forms. This is insecure attachment, and its core beliefs are equally simple and far more dangerous. I may not be lovable. People will eventually leave. Now consider what happens when someone carries these beliefs into adulthood. Love is no longer experienced as safety. It becomes something to prove, chase, and secure at any cost. This is where sexual behavior can become psychologically entangled, not as pleasure, but as confirmation. For example, if a child rarely experienced affection, touch, or emotional warmth, they may grow into an adult who associates physical intimacy with existence itself, not metaphorically, but neurologically. If someone desires me physically, I exist. And so physical contact becomes not just connection, but validation of being. In emotionally inconsistent households, where love is unpredictable, the brain becomes conditioned to associate love, anxiety, reward. This is the exact same reinforcement structure seen in addiction, which explains why many individuals feel intensely drawn to unstable, even harmful relationships, because stability feels unfamiliar. and unfamiliar feels unsafe. In more severe cases, such as neglect, a child internalizes something even more profound. I am not important. This creates a baseline emotional state of emptiness, and that emptiness does not disappear with age. It demands to be filled. So the individual turns outward. Alcohol, sexual experiences, consumption, stimulation, not out of indulgence, but out of psychological survival. And then a critical transformation occurs. Sexual behavior is no longer about desire. It becomes a regulation mechanism, a way to numb, a way to feel, a way to momentarily escape the void. But here is the paradox. The relief is temporary, and every time the behavior ends, the emptiness returns stronger than before. So the cycle escalates. Stronger stimulation, more frequent repetition, until the behavior becomes compulsive. Now, let us go one level deeper, because psychology alone does not fully explain the persistence of this cycle. For that, we turn to a philosophical insight. Human beings do not pursue what is good for them. They pursue what is familiar to them, even if what is familiar is painful. A child raised in an environment where love and fear coexist does not learn that love is safe. They learn love is intense. Love is unstable. Love hurts. And so, as adults, they do not choose peaceful relationships. They are drawn almost magnetically to emotional volatility because it feels like home. In trauma psychology, this is often referred to as trauma bonding, a cycle where pain and affection reinforce each other. But from a deeper perspective, this is not just a relational issue. It is a pattern encoded into consciousness itself, a loop that runs beneath awareness. Which brings us to the most important insight of this lecture. You are not repeating these relationships because you are weak. You are repeating them because your mind is trying to resolve something it has never understood. And until that structure becomes visible, nothing changes. You may change partners. You may change environments. You may even change behavior temporarily. But the underlying pattern remains intact. So the real question is not, why do I keep making these choices? The real question is, what internal structure is making these choices for me? Because the moment you see the structure clearly, precisely, without judgment, something remarkable happens. The repetition begins to lose its power. But there is one final layer we must address, because in many cases, this cycle does not exist alone. It is accompanied by something else. After the relationship comes discomfort. After the connection comes emptiness. And to suppress that emptiness, many turn to alcohol, spending, distraction, not randomly but systematically. The cycle becomes stimulation relief, emptiness, stronger stimulation. This is not habit. This is a self-reinforcing psychological system. And in the next lecture, we will explore this question. Why do sexual behavior, alcohol, and compulsive consumption so often appear together, not as separate problems, but as a single integrated structure? If this lecture resonated with you, then something has already begun to shift. Awareness is not the end of the process, but it is the only place where change can begin. If you want to go deeper into understanding the hidden structures that shape your relationships, your behavior, and your life, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this content, because sometimes a single insight can interrupt a lifetime of repetition, and that interruption can change everything.